My very first job out of college was at this big research and development laboratory for a big biomedical company. It was me and two other guys. We were the same age and we had a lot in common. So we got along really well. And we used a lot of lab equipment and we used a lot of lab supplies. We went through a lot of lab supplies. And the sales rep for the lab supplies and the lab equipment was the same guy that was the service tech for the lab equipment. Whenever we would need service for our equipment, we would call him. Whenever we needed to buy more stuff, we would call him. And because we were such a huge account for this company, he bought us free lunch every Friday. And he was the same age as us, so we got along well, we had the same interests, etc. And so we would look forward to free lunch Fridays. Until one Friday, he came in and said, "I'm sorry guys, but I can't make it the next couple of Fridays. I'm going to be away." We said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going on my second honeymoon, our first anniversary." We said, "Oh, that's cool. Where are you going?" And he said, "Well, that's kind of a long story. But if you're willing to listen to a long story, I'm willing to tell you a long story." And we said, "Sure, tell us this long story." And he said, "Well, back when I was in college, I was kind of an introvert. I was a science geek. I loved science. But somehow I didn't quite know how to vibe socially. I didn't know how to talk to people socially. I didn't know how to feel confident socially. But I really, really wanted a girlfriend. I read all these books on what to do, and when I read these books, I could understand how these techniques would work, but I just couldn't put them into practice in real life. And so I was kind of stuck, and I didn't know what to do. I was at this party, and I saw this guy doing magic tricks, and this was the most fantastic thing that I had ever seen. He was doing magic tricks, simple card tricks. I mean, they were simple, but I didn't know how he was doing them. But he was doing these tricks while telling these stories. And it seemed like the tricks were there to support the stories more than the stories were there to support the tricks. And these stories were very, very well calibrated. They had very, very clear character arcs, and they were kind of convoluted. These stories were kind of hard to follow. But every time he had some kind of a major plot point in the story, he would support it with a magic trick. Story, 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 plot point, poof, magic trick. Story, 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 plot point, poof, magic trick. And he kept doing this, and he held massive, fantastic eye contact with the people he was talking to. It was absolutely mesmerizing. And the crowd that was watching him was absolutely mesmerized, like they were hypnotized in a trance. But the girls in the audience that were watching him had these looks on their faces of just absolute fascination and captivation. The way they were looking at this guy, I thought to myself, if I could only get one girl to look at me that way, I would want for nothing. And so I waited until he was done, and I said, "Dude, how did you learn how to do this? Please teach me how to do this." And he said, "Well, this is just like anything else. If you want to learn how to tell stories, you need to practice telling stories. If you want to learn how to do magic tricks, you need to practice doing magic." And he gave me the name of an author that taught him some of the stuff he learned. And I went home and I bought one of his books on Amazon, and this book was fascinating. It had all kinds of ideas that were way beyond simple card tricks and simple storytelling. It was all about metaphysics of stories and magic and ancient magic. And in the book at the end, he said he teaches seminars. So I thought to myself, I need to go to one of these seminars so I can learn how to tell stories, so I can learn how to do magic. And I saved up my money, and luckily it was on a 4-day weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where I could ditch my classes and not get in trouble. And I went to this seminar, excited to learn how to tell stories. And the guy that came out said, "Before we start anything, let me tell you my background, so you know what you're getting into. When I was in high school, I was a terrible student. I had zero ambition. I had no clue what I wanted to be when I grew up. I didn't even want to be anything when I grew up. My only plan for life was to slide through high school, get C's and hopefully maybe some B's, get out, get a high school diploma, get a job in a factory, and just live my life. And beyond that, I didn't really care. I didn't even want to get into a relationship. I would just sit in the back of the class and watch everyone else participate in class discussions. I never was even interested in any of the things they were talking about. I never was interested in participating in class discussions. Until one weekend, I was running low on my weed supply, so I called my drug dealer and I said, "I need to buy a new supply." And he said, "Sure, meet me downtown at that new Age bookstore." So I got to the New Age bookstore. I got there a little early. And while I was wandering around, I saw this book by Carlos Castaneda, an American writer and spiritualist. And Carlos Castaneda would go out to the desert. He would take peyote, and he would have these spiritual experiences, and he would talk to these spirit guides. And these spirit guides would teach him things that you can't learn from books. They would teach him things that you can't learn from personal experience. You just have to open up your mind any way that you can to gain access to the spiritual superconscious mind, and through these spirit guides learn some of the greatest lessons of wisdom in the world. And he did this a lot, and he wrote about his experiences in these books. And I was so motivated by this. When my drug dealer showed up, I said, hey, can I change my order? Instead of buying a bag of weed, can I buy a bag of peyote instead? He said, sure, no problem. And so the next weekend, I went out to the desert. I brought enough food, water to last the night. It wasn't that cold at night, so I brought a lawn chair and a small tent. And I didn't know what to expect. So I took the peyote, and the first hour, I started to see trails everywhere. Like I turned my head and everything would kind of trail behind me. I would look up into the sky and look at the stars, and I would turn my head and the stars would trail behind me. After the second hour, I started to hear voices. But they were like whispers just outside of my conscious awareness. Kind of like if you're in a bedroom sleeping, but you're not really sleeping, and everybody in the house thinks you're sleeping, so they're talking in a low tone. It's kind of like that. You can sort of hear that people are talking, but you can't tell what they're saying. And these voices weren't scary. They weren't angry. They weren't accusational. They were just kind of outside of my conscious awareness. But after the third hour, they started to clarify. They started to kind of coagulate, and I could kind of triangulate where they were coming from. And so I pointed my chair to where these voices were coming from, and they kind of coalesced into a singular voice that was talking directly to me. And the voice said, now that you can listen to me, I have a very important message for you. Now that you're having this experience, now that your mind is opened, you have access to the superconscious spiritual mind that contains all the information that ever was, all the information that is, and all the information that ever will be. And because you can experience this, you now have an obligation to share this information with other people. A single neuron has no idea that it's inside of a larger brain, but you hook up 100 billion neurons together and they create consciousness. A human brain that can have memories and self-awareness and ambition and feelings and love and sadness and joy. Similarly, a single brain doesn't know that it's inside of a collective consciousness, but you hook up 100 or 8 billion brains on planet Earth together, and they create a collective consciousness. And because you're having this experience, you now have access to that collective consciousness. But the trick is that this spiritual information that you now have access to cannot be given to people directly. It can only be taught metaphorically through storytelling. This is why humans have told each other stories since the dawn of time, to gain access and share information from this super collective consciousness, this super collective spiritual intellectual consciousness. And that is your obligation now. No longer can you afford to sit in the back of the room and watch everybody else have the discussions. No longer can you afford to skate through life and do the bare minimum. Now you must participate. Because you're having this experience, you must participate in life. You must share your wisdom with others. You must share your experiences with others. You must share your insights and your opinions with others. I don't really remember much after that. I woke up in my tent the next morning, but that's when I really felt my ambition for the first time. I went back, I went through high school, I got B's and A's, I participated more, and as soon as I graduated, I started to learn the art of storytelling, and I would learn that from anybody I could. And that's when I learned that storytelling by itself is great, it's fantastic, but if you combine storytelling with magic tricks, it becomes much more hypnotic. Because as soon as you start doing any kind of magic trick, people's minds kind of shift, because we all love magic. We all love to believe in magic. And when you do magic tricks and tell stories, it's like a combination on two different levels. It really, really opens up people's minds. And the metaphors that you can deliver through these stories is profound to the human consciousness. And that's how I came to teach these seminars. And we spent the rest of the seminar practicing storytelling and practicing magic tricks. And that's when I discovered the other half of my brain. Before, I was just mostly an intellectual, scientific person. I didn't really vibe socially. But somehow, during that seminar, when I practiced telling stories and we practiced doing magic tricks, I gained access to both halves of my brain. And that's how I become both a sales rep and a service tech. I can do both sides. And I've been practicing ever since. And I asked him, I said, dude, what about when you went back to college? Did you go and tell stories at college like that guy at the party and do magic tricks and get all kinds of girls? I was waiting for the happy ending. And he said, no, that's not, I didn't need to do that. That's what I wanted to do. That was my intention, but I didn't need to do that because I met my future wife at that seminar. And that's where we're going next week on a second honeymoon, or on our first anniversary, our second honeymoon, to a 2-week storytelling magic seminar to remember what it was like when we learned how to tell stories, to remember what it was like when we first met each other. And that's why you guys can't get free lunch next week. But I'll leave you my contact information. If something does come up, you can still get in touch with me. But other than that, that's my story. Thank you very much for listening.